Good morning, everyone. My name is Bernard, and I am the growth hacker at 42 Floors, which is a venture-backed startup based out of San Francisco, California. And today, this morning, I'm here to talk to you about two topics: how to think about growth and what a growth mindset looks like, and ways that you can apply these growth mindset things to grow your business. So the first thing is that I tend to think that growth comes from a series of experiments. So what that means is that for your company or your business, you often try things like advertising or putting a billboard kind of on the next to the highway, and all of these growth and marketing things are all experiments, right? You tried print advertising, and you tried printing brochures and handing them out, and all of these marketing tactics are all an experiment that you ran that you probably found had pretty high return on your investment, and that was the reason why you continued to do it. So when we think about growth in terms of this, experimental method, the approach that I like to take about, applying growth is the scientific method, right? You have an objective that your business wants to meet. You form a hypothesis about, how you're going to reach your objective. You run the experiment, and then you have a conclusion. So first, you want to define your objective, right? And for each and every business, that's going to be different. If you're a consumer-facing app, then you probably want more daily active users. And if you're doing enterprise sales or B2E sales, then really you just want more money, right? So success for different types of companies is different. So it's important to understand, what you're going after. And once you've figured that out, right, then you can then start to make assumptions and say, well, if we advertise on Google, then we will get more traffic, and this traffic will convert into, more sales. And it's important to think about, the hypothesis as an assumption on how you think you're going to get more growth for your business. So then you want to run the experiment. And when running the experiment, you want to first, assume nothing about the experiment, because you won't know what's going to work. And very importantly, you want to set up analytics, right, to track how well the experiment is performing, or else you're shooting in the dark. And lastly, you want to make sure that you accumulate enough data about your experiment. So when I say assume nothing, I mean, just don't really have any expectations about the experiment that you're going to run, because it's really hard to know, what is going to work and what isn't going to work. So it's best that you just kind of have no expectations about, the experiment that you're going to run. And you have to set up analytics, because if you can't measure it, then you can't improve it. So the whole point of setting up analytics is to know how well each of your campaigns are performing, right? Because if you're running ads and you have no sense of, how well the traffic is doing or how many people are clicking on your ads, then really, are you even running an experiment in the first place? You're not. And the last and actually very important part is that you need to run the experiment for greater than 28 data points. And the reason why you need to do that is because a lot of the time, if you say, contact 10 people doing cold calls, right? You're going to run into a lot of variance, right? It could just be that you caught people on a day where a bunch of people were happy, or you're running ads in like a hot season, or it was just a really nice time of day and a bunch of people like clicked on your ad. And if you don't kind of accumulate this more than 28 data points, then your confidence interval is going to be below 95%. And what that basically means is that you can only be, like 80% confident that your experiment actually got you the results that you wanted to get. So the reason why I suggest 28 data points is 28 is the number that once you've reached that point, you can be 95% confident that your experiment performed the way that you actually wanted it to perform. So in conclusion, right, like basically you look at the experiment and you say, oh, I had this hypothesis that if we did this, then we would get more of this. Like, did that experiment work as planned? And if it did, scale the experiment, right? You put in $1 in AdWords and you're getting $1.05 out, or $2 out, then you basically want to pump as much money as you can, right, into getting more AdWords. Or if you realize that, like cold calling 28 people resulted in closing like $50,000 of revenue, then cold call 500, right? Because you're basically just printing money. But a huge portion of the time, what you ran isn't going to work. But the cool thing about that is that you get to learn something, right? And a lot of the time that can be like, okay, we ran AdWords on this bucket of like 10 or 20 keywords targeting this region, and maybe the experiment as a whole failed because your keywords weren't like profitable, but maybe 2 or 3 of them actually were profitable, and you can basically then just single out those keywords and then just experiment with running AdWords or Facebook targeting on those keywords, and then you're not really, you didn't actually fail, right? You like succeeded because you learned something about the marketplace, which now you can take to like apply to your future marketing campaigns. So basically, the whole point of all of this is that you're going to be running a ton of experiments all the time, because that's really the only way that you can figure out what's going to work, is by figuring out what doesn't work. So for me, I'm usually running about 10 experiments like every 2 weeks to figure out like, okay, is this a good channel for us to develop? Like, run a quick experiment, figure that out, and be like, okay, that failed. Move on to the next thing, and let's move on to the next thing, and let's continue kind of pushing this envelope and pushing these experiments, because the more experiments that I can run, then the more that we can learn as a company on how to figure out where to get more growth. So when you're thinking about getting more growth, like this is a very like basic web funnel where you have traffic, and some percentage of your traffic is going to convert into signups. So you can focus on 2 parts of the web funnel when you're thinking about growth, right? You can either get more traffic, or you can have a higher conversion rate. So for instance, say we have a hypothetical website, and we're getting 10,000 users to our website, and we're converting 10% of them. So a month, we're getting like 1,000 signups. And if we double the traffic, then we have 20,000 people coming to our website with a 10% conversion rate. We're getting 2,000 signups. Also, the same thing is if we double the conversion rate to 20%, we're still getting this like 2,000 signups. So basically, when you're thinking about growth, right, like think about which one is easier, right? And then you want to get more of that one until it makes more sense to get the other. So, like the easiest example is, say you have like 100,000 people coming to your website, doing stuff, and you realize that only like 0.1% of them turn into users, then, clearly you should fix your conversion rate before looking into getting more traffic, because, like fixing your conversion rate is going to yield like tons of results rather than trying to get 10,000 more visitors to your website, which is rather tough. But also in the same vein, say you just started your like product, your app, your service, right? And you're not getting anyone to come to your website. Then if you're just, emailing people on a one-to-one like ratio, then it's a lot easier to get one person to like take a look at your app and one person to come to your website. So you're probably going to do that. So when we think about like getting people to come to your website or to take a look at your app, we think about it in terms of market size, right? You have an audience and some percentage of them are going to convert into potential users. So basically you go and you explore different channels, right? For instance, we have Facebook, which is huge, right? It's the biggest social network like in the world, and only a very small fraction of them will actually, turn into potential users for your app. So, if we took, say, a Facebook group of, like mobile enthusiasts, then your conversion rate is going to be a lot it's going to be a lot higher, because the content and your app and your web and your company is going to be a lot more relevant to serving and helping like the needs of those people. So basically, in terms of market size, right, you want to go to the channels where your potential audience already are. And like it might be great to go, oh, let's run a huge ad on Facebook, targeting everybody. But chances are, like the return on your investment or your conversion rate is going to be super low, and you're basically going to be like throwing money away. And we all want to make more money, so we wouldn't want to do that. So now, let's move on to growth hacking recipes and kind of take a look at some of the things that, I've done in the past that you might possibly be able to do, to grow your companies and grow your products and grow your services. So when we think about getting like more traffic, I always tend to think that like there's generally these like three like tactics that like I like to use, where I borrow as much of everything that other people already did as possible. And whether the borrowing is of other people's money, or the borrowing is of other people's audience, or the borrowing is just of other people's technology, right? Like if I'm spending the time building out like a CRM, then I'm wasting resources where I could just use a CRM that works out of the box, like Zoho or like Sugar. So that's one tactic. And then the other tactic is basically to leverage your like core assets and to leverage you to get kind of a lot more of like what you want. And I know that sounds a little bit vague, but when we dive into kind of like the growth hacking things, I'll start to point out places where you can leverage other people's like audiences, or leverage like something that you created that has like no value, except that you said it had value. And that's like an amazing place to be. And the last is that you want to incentivize people, right? You want to incentivize people to do what you want them to do, right? Whether that's, get them to tell their friends that like they should use your product or service. Like you should incentivize them with, hopefully an amazingly built product or service. or an affiliate marketing program where you're just straight up incentivizing them with money, right? You tell more people to use my product and service, and I will pay you money. Like, it doesn't really get much better than incentivizing and borrowing and leveraging. So let's first take a look at Eventbrite. Eventbrite is interesting because it's a ticketing platform for anybody really to throw any event that they want. And beyond a certain capacity, once you put your event up on Eventbrite, then it becomes a real event that people actually will go to, pay money to go see, as long as it looks professional enough and you have some people lending credibility to the event. So last year at South by Southwest, I had a hypothesis that we should throw an event to build a bigger audience for a food startup that I was working on at the time. And initially, it started off as a joke, with one of my food blogging friends. I was like, hey, let's throw our own South by Southwest event. Wouldn't that be awesome? And she was like, yeah, that would be awesome. And I was like, okay, but keep in mind, right, I have no money, and I don't know anybody in the Austin food scene. And she's like, oh, that's fine. We'll just throw a food crawl or something where we take people to the best restaurants, in Austin, and they'll eat a little bit here, and then we'll crawl to the next location, and then they'll eat a little bit there. So we basically took this thing, we called it SXSW Food Crawl, and we put it up on Eventbrite. And all of a sudden, it became a legitimate event, and people started signing up for it, massively. Within the first day, we had a couple hundred people, solely because we put South by Southwest in the name, right? And looking back in hindsight, what we were doing was that we were borrowing the South by Southwest audience with the event that we threw, right? We called it SXSW Food Crawl, kind of on accident and kind of on a whim, except what ended up happening was that people actually thought we were an official South by Southwest event, which we weren't. But since we put it up on Eventbrite, it started working. And what started ending up happening is that we would take this list of people that we were getting that were signing up to our event, and we reached out to all of the food bloggers in Austin, and we were like, hey, we're throwing this event, do you want to help us spread the word? Maybe you want to throw your own food panel and talk about Austin's best food and what's happening with the scene. And we ended up getting a Food Network chef to basically keynote our speech, because we just kept talking to people, and then we kept trying to borrow these audiences that these influencers already built, and then leverage the fact that we had this event and these attendees and say to these influencers hey, look, if you come and support our event, then you're gonna get hundreds or thousands of people to get exposure to, right? So we leverage that fact over and over. And then we started thinking, okay, how can we get more clever with this, right? How can we incentivize people to start doing what we want them to do? So we had these food bloggers and we had these attendees, except we didn't have any food, right? This is a food crawl, and there's supposed to be restaurants and things. So we started going to all of the restaurants, and we were like, hey, well, we're throwing this thing, and would you like to give us a deal? Because if you do, then we'll put you on this secret food crawl map where basically you'll get exposure to a ton of influencers, a Food Network chef. All these people will come and try your food. And the only reason why I called it a secret food crawl map was because it sounded more cool, like, don't people want like access to like secret stuff, right? So like, it was just like a marketing like shenanigan, just a plan. And all of a sudden, right, we had like these like 46 restaurants like on board, giving us like buy one, get one free deals, you know, like $2 off cocktails, but only if people showed up with one of our wristbands, which is one of these like orange things right here. And basically, the orange thing had a link to the map and a link to our website. And it was just like brilliant because like the day like of our event, we were basically like, oh yeah, you know, you should come to this thing because we're going to be giving out these wristbands that are gonna give you like deals and like access to like this exclusive secret map that we built just for you. And it was just like it just totally worked, which was like the hilarious part. You know, but when you're like starting to push the bounds of like growth and like what's acceptable, you start running into problems, right? So we got a cease and desist from South by Southwest because they were basically like, okay, look, like you called it SXSW. Clearly, you're not a part of SXSW, so you need to stop using that name and use something else. And you know, when we first got this email, we were like, oh, like crap, like what are we going to do? And we just apologized. We're like, oh, look, sorry. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. We'll change the name. We'll call it Food Crawl at SXSW. Is that okay? And they're like, cool. Yeah, thanks so much for tweaking the name. And congrats on the popular event. At that point, we had already gotten 12,000 people to like RSVP. So he was like, yeah, like, we probably should talk about like crowd management and like how, you know, you're going to like work with South by Southwest now, because if you have so many people showing up, then there's going to be problems, right, with the traffic, and there's going to be problems. So we should like figure all of that out. And of course we had like analytics kind of on the whole thing. And at the end of it, we ended up selling about 23,000 tickets to our event because we borrowed the South by Southwest name, and then with their audience, we took, you know, their audience and leveraged it to get more like, you know, influencers on board to promote our event. And then since we had them on board, we got the restaurants on board to give us deals, and it all just kind of worked out. And we ended up building an email list of like 20,000 emails just from running this like event. And it was probably like the craziest experiment that I ran so far. And that just goes to show that, you know, you should try anything and everything. Another like interesting like place to go to find potential users or customers for your service is Quora, because Quora is basically a question and answer website, right? There's people who are looking for answers to their problems, right? They're saying like, what are some of the great startups in the real estate world? Or, you know, where can I find an app that helps me park my car easier in the city or whatever? And the reason why it's great is that like a ton of these questions actually get like a ton of views and followers, because you know, you start to see that certain people are asking or looking for the same question. So for 42 floors, I basically scraped Quora for, you know, like the keywords like co-working, commercial space, office space, and I kind of found like the topics that had the most views, right? Because they had the most potential to basically, you know, segment off like some of the traffic to our website. So I scraped the list, and I basically just answered all of the questions on Quora, like regarding how to find office space, and you know, like where can we find office space really, because a bunch of people were looking for it. And of course, you know, I got some of my coworkers and some of my friends to boost, you know, the posts of my answers, because you know that's what you do. And as a result, we got 3,400 sessions, which may not actually sound that much, but the interesting part is that when you look at the bounce rate and the pages per session and the average duration, those are insane numbers, right? Like a bounce rate of 36% basically means that somebody who came to your website did something 64% of the time. And if you kind of look at this site average right here, our site average is 70%. So the people who are coming from Quora basically had a ton of high intent, right? Because they were looking for a solution to their problem. And by answering the questions and showing up first, we basically had the most relevant answer. And the average pages per session is 5 compared to a site average of 3. So basically, this traffic is worth 2 times more than regular traffic that comes to our website. Of course, with anything, you start running into problems when you're kind of pushing the bounds of growth, where a Quora admin was like, "Yo, man, you're clearly just promoting your stuff. You gotta stop that or be more apparent about your affiliation." So I fixed everything with them as well, but it happens. Another interesting place to go, right? If you're looking for users, you're looking to build an audience, is Reddit, because Reddit is one of the biggest online communities in the world. And what's really cool about Reddit is that there's these things called subreddits, right? There's these little mini pockets of communities where people get together and they like to talk about gadgets, right? This is r/gadgets. Or they like to talk about mobile apps or finding the next and new stuff. And basically, the easiest thing that you can do on Reddit is to just message users who seem likely candidates for your app, right? You go to r/gadgets and you're like, "Look, I'm building this little iPhone Bluetooth receiver. What do you think? Would you pay for it? Would you be willing to try it?" So for one of my side projects, I basically scraped the most active users on Reddit in a particular subreddit, and I just messaged 28 of them as an experiment. I was like, "Hey, I've been working on this side project. We just beta launched it. I saw your post about when you talked about this thing. Why don't you give it a shot?" And the guy immediately comes back to me and he's like, "Is it okay for me to start advertising your website?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't I want that?" And so he basically then put our website onto Reddit under his username, and that immediately drove 50 plus signups to our app just the very day after we launched. And kind of the way to keep track of when you're messaging users on Reddit is really just kind of this spreadsheet thing that I made. Basically, I took the contact information of the person and I was like, "Okay, did I message them? And if I did they respond? And if they responded, did they actually sign up or create a profile?" And you kind of get this, this little funnel breakdown of how well your efforts are actually doing. And basically, when you first start this app or startup or something, you have 0 traffic, right? And messaging people on a one-on-one basis gets you 1 more traffic or 2 more traffic. And that's awesome because you're getting infinity growth off of your 0 traffic, right? So another way that you can kind of take advantage of Reddit is by creating content. And creating content is kind of tricky because you have to get the content created, and then you have to post it to the subreddit, and then people actually have to like your content. and kind of share it. And it's really hard to know like what kind of content will work like well with like certain pockets of communities. But the interesting thing about creating content and putting it on Reddit is that you get a feedback loop for how well your writers are actually writing, right? Because say, like you have a team of outsourced writers or maybe in-house writers. A lot of the time you tell them, oh, I'm running this content marketing campaign, right? I want you to write a bunch of stuff that, we think that people want to read. But there's no really clear and objective way to figure out if people actually care about what you're writing. So instead, you can basically use Reddit as a feedback system for your content, right? You get this content created, you post it to Reddit kind of in the sub-community that you're going after, and the community will tell you, is this writing actually good? And that's the way that I use like kind of creating content on Reddit for, is that I will like screen a bunch of writers and I'll have like no idea how good any writer is. And I'll basically tell them, yeah, here's a topic, write about it, and I'm gonna post it to Reddit, just as a heads up. And if you like get above 20 upvotes, then we'll keep you around. But if you don't, like tough luck, didn't work out. And that's proven to be really effective because what you end up getting is writers who know how to write for a community, writers who know what people want to like, read about, and that's like extremely important. The last kind of thing that is interesting that you can do on Reddit is basically just advertise. This is another one of my side projects that I worked on in the past. It was a cake pricing calculator. But basically, the number's a little bit cut off. But the cost per click that you're looking at for advertising on Reddit is about 19 cents cost per click. And that's like really good, right? We're talking about going after communities of people in specific like subreddits, right? So for my cake pricing calculator, I advertised on like the baking sub-community, and to be paying 19 cents a click to drive people who bake all the time to my website is like phenomenal. And it's like, a $1 cost per 1,000 impressions. But wait, we have to look at the analytics, right? Like, were these efforts actually worth our while? And interestingly enough, if you take a look at like the organic Reddit versus the paid Reddit, you get a lot more traffic with like organic Reddit, and the people who come from like the organic way, like they bounce like 87% of the time compared to the people who, when you pay like for an advertisement, bounce 89% of the time. But that's really high, right? And to a degree, my belief is that, these are people who, they're just browsing a social website, right? Like they may not actually be looking to pay you money or to like, do what you want them to do. They just, found some article interesting, they clicked on it, and they go, oh, well, whatever, I'm here, I'm out, whatever, this isn't like actually interesting. So you kind of have to gauge, right? Like for each industry and each kind of product and service, you're gonna run into like different bounce rates and different ways that like people treat like your traffic. The interesting thing between like organic and paid is that the people who came from paid converted 3.9% compared to 3.62%. And the reason why that occurs is because when you pay for an advertisement on Reddit, you basically get to choose where the link goes, right? So you pay for a link, you basically go, okay, let's drop them on my landing page with a clear call to action and, like driving them to sign up. But when you kind of do organic Reddit, it's like you drop people in on like your content page, and that kind of like is a lot harder to convert. So of course, like I said, you're always pushing the boundaries. I got like a couple of my Reddit accounts banned for basically, posting all this crazy comments and basically trying to do this like voting ring thing where I had like 7 accounts and like different hotspots. And anytime I like posted like a thing on Reddit, I would log into like different hotspots and like just upvote my own stuff. So it always like showed up on the top page. And then that's like when the experiment began. But it happens and it's all good. Another interesting place to go if you're looking for growth is Meetup, right? So for example, this is Mobile Istanbul. And you can join a meetup, right? Say you're launching a mobile Android iOS app. You join a meetup and usually there's this guy, he's called the organizer. You can just reach out to him and be like, hey, like I'm launching this product, service, this app of mine, and it'd be really great if you could maybe like promote it a little bit or give me like 5 minutes at the beginning or the end of like the meetup so that I can demo it in front of these mobile enthusiasts, right? Because these are the people that if you're building a mobile app, these are people that you want using your app, giving you feedback, giving you money. You can also start a meetup. And the interesting thing about starting a meetup is that all of a sudden, you become the influencer, right? So I started a meetup for, like this gaming thing in San Francisco. And kind of after like I started it, I started getting these like messages in like my inbox saying like, hey Bernard, I wanted to reach out and see, if you wanted some money. Or hey, I'm starting this thing, right? Like, let's meet up. And the cool thing about this is that you get to get in early with these people and build relationships kind of with other people in your spaces. So you basically get like an early look into what your competitors are like doing, right? Like what people are trying to pitch you on, you kind of just get access to that. And you get access to people who want to really just give you cash because they're hosting like a tournament or something. So a weird added benefit to creating a meetup is that you get to rank on Google. And the reason that happens is because the meetup domain, like www.meetup.com, actually has an extremely strong domain authority with Google, right? There's a bunch of people who link to Meetup, and when you start a meetup, you get to customize whatever you want right here. And that's basically like a second-tier directory to whatever you want, right? Like if you want to be the influencer in mobile Istanbul, then you get www.meetup.com/mobile Istanbul, and that's yours. And you'll probably start ranking in Google rather quickly. And that ends up just driving more people to contact you because you're an influencer, and it drives more people to sign up to your meetup and basically build your audience. So another tactic, right, is to just straight up do influencer outreach. And what's like an influencer? An influencer is somebody who has already built an audience that you want to like take advantage of. And that could mean somebody who has a Twitter following of 2,000 people who likes tweeting about mobile apps, or it could be like a gaming blog that you really want to have them talk about your product or service. So basically you can just reach out to them, comment on their blogs, talk to them, and pitch them kind of like on your products or services. And you would be surprised kind of how many people will just be like, oh yeah, like I'd be happy to like help you and pass it along to like other influencers, right? And it really depends on your approach and like the copy that you write to them and the messages that you send. But the analytics for kind of influencer outreach looks about the same for Reddit, right? You basically scrape their URL and you go, okay, like this is a blog, this is a website, this is a forum. You look at their domain rank or you look at the audience size. And that's actually really important because you don't want to like be building this relationship with an influencer that doesn't have a big audience, right? It's just not worth it if somebody has like 100 followers and you're like following them around, retweeting what they're tweeting and like direct messaging them. You want to go for like the big stuff. So you just contact a bunch of them, you kind of get like the same like funnel breakdown. So now we're delving into more like tried and true ways of basically looking at growth. But I wanted to explore basically like search engine optimization really quickly because I think it's really important and that there's a lot of upside to be had. So when you're looking at SEO, there's basically three main components, which is your keyword research, your on-page elements, and link building. So when you do your keyword research, you want to make sure that the keywords that you're like going after and you're trying to optimize for are actually have a lot of like monthly searches because you don't want to like waste your time, like optimizing for office rentals when there's only 390 people searching for office rentals a month compared to commercial real estate or office space, right? And the best way that you can find this data is that it exists in the Google AdWords keyword planner. You kind of just type in which keywords that you're thinking about, and it'll just pop out with like basically how much people are searching for certain terms and kind of like other ideas that they'll give you. So the second part of keyword research is the competition on the Google's like ranking page, right? Because if you're looking for office space, then for us, we're competing with Craigslist, which has a root domain authority of like 75. And the number of backlinks that they have is 666,000 backlinks. So that's really tough to compete with. When you do your keyword research, it's important to basically figure out, okay, like, is this a keyword that A, has a lot of monthly searches, and B, is kind of relatively easy to rank for, right? So now that you've figured out kind of this keywords that you want to go for, you want to basically make sure that the keywords show up in a unique way to Google. And what that means is that you create content that is, indexed by Google that has your keyword. And you make a sitemap that basically points to all of the places where, like you have web pages basically telling Google that this page exists. Come, like, take a look at it. And you make sure to put the keyword, kind of in the title and the meta description and the H1 tags. And lastly is the link building. And the link building aspect of search engine optimization is rather tricky. It's probably the most mysterious part of search engine optimization because it's the part that's not completely in your control, right? You can blog a lot or try to do guest blogging or do press releases, but that doesn't guarantee that people are going to link to your website, right? You can even just like reach out to people and ask them, hey, link to my website, but like that doesn't really mean that they actually will. The interesting approach to link building is what I call like creative endeavors. And that's basically when you do something crazy just so that people talk about you, people like link to you. So, for instance, one of the payment companies was called like WePay, and they were competing with PayPal on payments. And at some conference, they basically took a bunch of money and they put it, they froze it in an ice cube and they put it in front of the PayPal conference. And a ton of people linked to WePay because they were like, wow, what are they doing? That's crazy. They're competing against PayPal. So you'd really only want to delve into creative endeavors if you think that search engine optimization is going to play a big role in your business. The next thing, I briefly mentioned search engine marketing because it's one of the most explored and exploited and efficient systems on the market, right? It's very rare that you're going to find a keyword where you can put in $1 and get out $2, because if you could, people already exploit that. So the reason I bring up search engine marketing is because I use it as an objective way of figuring out our branding, right? Because a lot of the time, you talk with people, your colleagues, your CEO, your co-founders, and you get into these debates that oh, I believe our company should be about having the best service, or serving people 24/7, or we need the best data on the market, or people want to find office rentals instead of office leases. And really, a really easy way of figuring out who's right and who's wrong is to run an AdWords campaign, right? Because you can basically make these little ads that say, all right, well, 2,000 plus office rentals on one site versus thousands of office leases on one site. Which one's better? Or do people want to click on affordable and flexible office leases? Or do they want to see real photos of listings, right? And by running this campaign, what you get is this number over to the right, which is your click-through rate, right? And that's the percentage of people who see your ad and then click on it. So in this particular example, affordable and flexible office leases is performing about 50% better than seeing real photos of listings. Obviously, that's not taking into account the thousands of office leases part, but I think those two are pretty similar. And that's pretty crazy, right? You're talking about 50% more people willing to come to your website because they want to find affordable and flexible office spaces rather than seeing real photos of listings. So you can take this data and basically apply it to your website, right? Apply it to your copy and apply it to your calls to action and say, see real, the affordable and flexible office spaces, sign up here. And that will probably improve your conversion rate, right? Or the people going to your website. The last thing that I also wanted to briefly mention is Facebook outreach, because basically there's a bunch of groups and communities on Facebook as well. You basically type in your query, you click this button that says see more results for whatever, or else they're gonna suggest a bunch of nonsense. And you get this page where you can see all the results, you can see the people that are related to the keywords you're going after, the apps, the pages, the groups. And for us, I selected the groups because, this commercial real estate network has 7,000 members, right? It's just so easy to go in there and talk about commercial real estate with these people because they're already talking about commercial real estate. And they're already, people who understand what you're trying to do. And they're probably much more likely to give you business and to give you money than, just randomly running an ad on Facebook or even running a targeted ad on Facebook, because there's so much ad fatigue and marketing fatigue. So other kind of like normal channels that you can look at are like, Hacker News for kind of the developers, the engineering like crowd. Obviously there's Twitter and there's Pinterest, but the most kind of interesting stuff is the stuff that people don't talk about, right? The stuff that is kind of out there and like left to be tried, because those are the things that aren't saturated yet, right? No one's like heard of this new app or going to Vine before Vine becomes like popular. And these are like the interesting ways to generate a lot of growth, because you're thinking outside the box and you're going to places where other companies aren't going, and you're exploiting the crap out of them. So, think outside the box and like really go for the crazy stuff. I want to briefly go into more signups, because I talked about it earlier kind of in the how to think about growth, even though kind of other speakers will go really in depth into kind of basically what like conversion rate, which gets you like more signups. But basically when you think about conversion rate, right, there's this like breakdown of like stuff where you need to know what your current conversion rate is, because if you don't, then you don't know how well you're doing. And when you're thinking about how to optimize or make your conversion rate better, you want to make like as massive of changes to your landing page or your splash page as you can, because that like will drive the a big number of like change, like 20% or something rather than 2 or 3% just by changing like the color of a button or like the text. So for this side project, which is my cake pricing calculator, I tested basically this versus that design. And the analytics is that basically the new one was 23% better, because from people loading my like bake calc and adding an ingredient, more people did more actions with the design on the right. And that probably has to just do with the fact that it looked prettier and there was like buttons that you can click on and stuff like that. So, briefly going into ways to like get higher conversion rate is to have credibility, right? Say, oh, these are some of the companies that we've worked with in the past, and just like name them out. And if, some of them look like companies that you recognize, then you'll be, oh, okay, like this company is like reputable, it's like respectable. Another way is to just put people's faces like on your website, right? Because when you see a face of like some guy, then you're just like, oh yeah, all right, like they have like actual customers like talking about their product and their service. And we can put them together, right, and put a clear call to action and people's faces, and that looks like really nice. So I want to leave you with this, right? Like, growth comes from a series of experiments, and really the only way to find the channels and find the ways to get massive growth is to just try everything, right? And don't be afraid to fail, because a ton of the stuff that I've done in the past simply just didn't work. But it's okay, because I learned from it, and as a result, I got tons of growth from it. Thank you.